Imagine this. You're home alone, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. But something's off. There's a feeling, a presence you can't explain. The air in the room grows colder, and that familiar silence is shattered by a sound that makes your blood run cold. Someone is in the attic. This is a story that was sent to me by a subscriber, a man who's convinced that something still lives in his attic. And no, it's not the settling of old wood or the wind rattling the windows. This is something else, something far darker. Stay with me because the details of what happened next are enough to make you question what's real and what's not. The house had always felt like home. It was a small, quaint cottage tucked at the edge of the woods, the kind of place that seemed to have been built long before time itself. The wooden beams of the house creaked and groaned, telling stories of the years that it endured. The scent of old wood mixed with the faintest hint of dust and something older, something that didn't quite belong. For most of his life, James had found comfort in the familiarity of it all. It was his sanctuary, his escape from the world outside. That all changed one fateful evening. It began as a normal evening, the kind James had grown accustomed to. After a long day at work, he had come home, stripped off his coat, and made his way into the kitchen. The sound of his footsteps echoed throughout the empty house, the only noise breaking the silence of the still evening. He poured himself a glass of wine, sipped it slowly, and retreated to the living room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its warmth spreading across the room. It was the kind of night where you would curl up with a good book, perhaps let your mind wander in the warmth of the fire's glow. But the stillness, though comforting, felt unnerving tonight. It was an odd feeling, one he couldn't quite shake off. As he opened his book, the room seemed to close in on him. The quiet was oppressive, and the more he sat there, the more he became aware of the silence that surrounded him. He'd heard it before, that faint scraping sound coming from the attic, but tonight it was louder. James paused, eyes darting toward the ceiling. The scraping continued. It was almost as if something or someone was clawing at the wood above. The sound was soft but persistent, like nails dragging across the surface of an old chalkboard. He frowned, trying to ignore it. Perhaps it was just a house settling. The wind outside could have caused the attic's old beams to shift, the dust particles in the air making the noise seem louder. Still, the sound didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder, more deliberate. James set his book aside, his heartbeat suddenly quicker. He stood up, his feet heavy against the floorboards as he moved towards the staircase that led to the attic. His eyes were fixed on the door at the top of the stairs, the wooden barrier that led to the dark and musty space above. He had always avoided the attic. It was full of old furniture, forgotten treasures, and relics that had been left to rot away with time. But tonight, something was different. He could feel it in his bones. The very air around him seemed to grow heavier each passing second. Taking a deep breath, he approached the staircase, the steps creaking under his weight. The scratching sound grew louder, more frantic. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. It was something else, something that shouldn't have been there. James froze on the stairs, his hand hovering over the railing. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He glanced back toward the living room, wondering if he should just ignore it. But curiosity gnawed at him, that insatiable urge to know, to understand what was causing this strange disturbance in his home. Something about the noise made his skin crawl, and as if drawn by an invisible force, he moved upward, one step at a time. The attic door was old, the wood darkened by years of neglect. The handle was cool to the touch, the brass worn from years of use. James took a deep breath, his mind racing as he turned the handle. The door creaked open slowly, as though protesting the intrusion into the forgotten space beyond. The cold air from the attic rushed past him, making his breath catch in his throat. The beam of his flashlight illuminated the room beyond. Dust filled the air like a thick fog, swirling in the dim light. There were old chairs, forgotten boxes stacked haphazardly, and the remnants of an old wardrobe. A single window let in a faint beam of moonlight, casting long shadows across the room. But despite the musty old furniture, there was a feeling in the room that unsettled him the most, the feeling that something or someone was watching him. James shook his head, trying to push the thought from his mind. It was just his imagination, surely. But as he stepped further into the room, the air grew colder, a sharp chill settling into his bones. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. His heart pounded louder in his chest, each beat echoing in the stillness. Then suddenly, there was a sound, a low growl, deep and guttural. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the house settling, it was something alive, something sentient. James froze, his breath catching in his throat. The growl came again, louder this time. It was coming from the far corner of the room, near the old wardrobe. He could feel the blood drain from his face as he stepped toward the corner. His feet were heavy, unwilling to move, but his curiosity pushed him forward. His hand gripped the flashlight tighter as he moved closer, the growling growing louder with each step. And then, through the darkness, he saw it, a pair of eyes, glowing faintly in the dark. They weren't human. The eyes blinked slowly, as though it had been waiting for him, watching him all along. The light from the flashlight revealed nothing else, just the eyes, a piercing, unnatural glow that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. He stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from his grip. His heart raced in his chest, the terror washing over him in waves. He turned turned to run to escape, but before he could move, the growl came again, this time much closer, and then the attic door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping him inside. In the darkness, the eyes remained, watching. The air in the attic had grown thick and suffocating, like a heavy blanket that pressed down on his chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. James's heart raced, his mind spinning in a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The door had slammed shut with a force he couldn't explain, locking him inside the dim, dust-filled space. The silence that followed felt deafening, as though the whole house was holding its breath. And then the eyes, those glowing eyes, remained fixed on him, unmoving, unblinking. It was the kind of gaze that seemed to pierce straight through him, as though the entity knew every secret buried deep in his mind. His legs trembled beneath him as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was it a trick of the light? Was it his imagination? But no, he could feel it, the cold air, the unnatural stillness. The eyes weren't a product of his mind. They were real, and whatever they belonged to was waiting, watching with unsettling patience. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice cracking as he spoke. The words felt weak in the vast emptiness of the attic, swallowed up by the oppressive silence that followed. He felt foolish the moment they left his lips, but he couldn't stop himself. Fear gripped him like a vice, squeezing the air from his lungs. The growl came again, low and menacing, this time from the far corner of the room. James spun around, his eyes scanning the dark shadows, looking for anything that could explain the noise, the sensation, the dread that was slowly consuming him. He reached for the flashlight, still lying on the floor where it had fallen, and clicked it on again. The beam of light flickered for a moment before illuminating the dark corners of the room, but nothing seemed out of place. Just old furniture, abandoned crates, and forgotten memories of a time long past. The growl came again, but this time it was different. It was closer. He turned quickly, the flashlight trembling in his hand, casting erratic shadows on the walls. His breath came in short gasps, his chest tight with panic. It felt like something was circling him, stalking him. The glow from the eyes had faded, leaving nothing but the vast darkness of the attic. His body tensed as he felt the air shift cold, heavy, thick with an unnatural presence. Something was moving in the darkness. He could feel it. James's mind raced, his thoughts a blur of confusion and terror. Was this real? Was he trapped in a nightmare? Or was he awake? The questions swirled in his mind, but the answer didn't come. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the suffocating fear that was slowly taking over every fiber of his being. He had to get out. But how? The attic door was locked. No matter how much he yanked on the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was as if something unseen, was holding it shut, keeping him inside. His palms were slick with sweat as he pounded against the door, his voice rising in desperation. "Let me out, please. I don't want to be here," he shouted, but the only response was the sound of his own frantic breathing. He stumbled back, the terror rising like a tide in his chest. The growl came again, this time louder, more distinct. It was coming from behind him, from the shadows. He spun around, the beam of his flashlight catching something in the corner, something that shouldn't have been there. A figure, tall, dark, and inhuman. It moved with unnatural speed, its form barely visible in the dim light, but James could see enough. A silhouette shifting in the dark. It was too large to be human, too twisted, too wrong. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes fixed on the figure, unable to look away. It wasn't just a person. It was something else. Something alive, but not human. James felt his legs give out beneath him. He crumpled to the floor, his body trembling with fear as the figure moved closer. The sound of its footsteps was muffled, but they were there. He could hear them, each step echoing in the silence like the drumbeat of an impending disaster. He tried to scream, to call out for help, but the words caught in his throat. The figure was almost upon him now, its presence filling the air, making it difficult to breathe. It stood in front of him, close enough for him to feel the cold emanating from its form, its features still hidden in the shadows. And then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come." The words were thick, laden with an eerie, unnatural quality. They seemed to resonate in the air, sending a chill down James's spine. His mind struggled to make sense of it, to understand what was happening. Who or what was this? And why was it in his attic? The figure took a step closer, its presence overwhelming. The darkness seemed to press in on all sides, the shadows growing deeper, more oppressive. James could barely move, his body frozen with fear. He could feel the cold touch of terror creeping up his spine, and all he wanted was to escape. But escape wasn't possible. The figure knelt down in front of him, its eyes, those same glowing eyes, peering into his soul. James could feel his heart racing in his chest, the pounding like a drum, faster and louder. The air grew colder still, and his breath came out in sharp, ragged gasps. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The figure's lips curled into something that could have been a smile, though it didn't reach the eyes. The eyes were empty, voids of darkness that seemed to suck in all the light around them. And in that moment, James realized he wasn't alone in this attic. Not anymore. "I want you to understand," the figure said, its voice a rasp that made his skin crawl. "I want you to know that you're not the first, and you won't be the last." The air around them seemed to ripple with tension, the oppressive presence of the figure filling the space. James tried to push himself away. His body wouldn't obey. Fear had rooted him to the spot, leaving him powerless in the face of whatever this thing was. "Who are you?" James forced out the question, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his own heart. The figure's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too elongated to be human. Its eyes gleamed with something ancient, something that had been waiting in the shadows for a long time. "We are the ones who remain," it replied, its voice thick with malice. "We are the ones who survived." The last word echoed in the air, reverberating in James's mind like a death knell, and then the figure reached out. James's scream was swallowed by the darkness. The darkness enveloped him, swallowing the last remnants of his thoughts, his sense of time, and even his own breath. For a long moment, James couldn't move. His entire body was frozen, as though he had been turned to stone. The figure in front of him, its sharp, elongated features still haunting the edges of his mind, remained a presence, a shadow, unrelenting and terrifying. It was then, in the silence that followed, that James felt something shift. The air around him seemed to hum with an almost electric energy, the tension palpable. The figure had not moved, but its presence filled every inch of the attic, the shadows stretching long and deep. He couldn't understand why, but in the stillness of that moment, he began to hear something else, something faint at first, a growing clearer, a whisper. It was soft, just barely audible, but it was there, threading through the thick air like a thread winding through a needle. The voice was not the same as the figure's, not the guttural rasp he had heard earlier, but something different, something older. It seemed to come from the very walls themselves, from the floorboards beneath his feet, from the dark corners of the room. The whisper grew louder, insistent. "You are not alone, not here, not now." James's pulse quickened, the cold sweat on his brow turning to chills that ran down his spine. He tried to move, tried to force his limbs to obey, but they wouldn't listen. His fingers felt numb, his body paralyzed by fear and the oppressive force of the entity in front of him. He struggled, but all that came out was a pitiful gasp. And then, as if in response to his desperation, the shadows shifted again. The figure bent lower, closer to him. Its features became clearer, and in that instant, James could see its true form, no longer just a silhouette in the darkness, but something far more terrifying. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its body stretched unnaturally thin, as if it had been pulled out of shape, elongated by some unseen force. Its limbs were too long, its fingers tipped with claws that seemed to twitch with anticipation, like a predator poised to strike. And its face was a mask of emptiness, its eyes glowing faintly, but with an eerie, unnatural light that sent a wave of nausea crashing over James. It wasn't just watching him, it was feeding on him. The realization hit him like a wave of cold water. He wasn't just trapped in this attic with a malevolent entity. He was the prey. And this thing, whatever it was waiting for him to understand the truth. The whispering grew louder still, a chorus of voices now filling the room, echoing off the walls, mingling with the growls and hisses of the figure before him. The voices were endless, filling his mind with their words that meant nothing and everything at the same time. "You are not the first. You will not be the last," the voices chanted, layering over each other in a chaotic melody. It felt as if they were digging into his very thoughts, pulling out the deepest, most vulnerable parts of him and exposing them for the creature's enjoyment. His mind reeled. What were they talking about? What did they mean? The attic, the house, the figure, all of it felt connected, as if this moment had been predestined, like a puzzle piece that had been waiting for him to fall into place. Suddenly, with a speed that took his breath away, the figure reached out, its long fingers curling around his throat, tightening like a vice. The coldness of its touch seeped through his skin, down into his very bones. His vision blurred as panic surged through him, his body fighting to escape, but it was no use. The figure's grip was unyielding, and he could feel his consciousness slipping away. Just as everything seemed to fade, a new sound filled the air. A door creaked open. James's body jerked in shock, his eyes snapping wide open. The pressure on his throat loosened, and for a brief fleeting moment he was free. The figure remained standing over him, but its gaze shifted as though distracted. James took in a sharp breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He glanced around, his eyes desperately searching for the source of the sound. The door to the attic was now ajar, and through the sliver of the doorway, he could see something, someone standing there. A figure, human in shape, but dark in shadow, just like the rest of the attic. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be another person? Someone who could help him? But as the figure stepped forward into the dim light of the attic, James's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't another human, not even close. It was another one of them. But it was different. This new figure didn't have the same grotesque, elongated features as the first. Instead, it was normal, almost human, almost. James couldn't believe his eyes. The figure moved closer, its steps deliberate, its presence heavy in the room. And then it spoke. "Don't listen to him." The words were soft, but there was a weight to them. And as they sank into his mind, he realized that this was the answer to everything, the truth he had been seeking. This new figure was not an entity of darkness. It was trapped, just like him. "You've got to get out. You've got to leave this place." James's mind spun, and everything began to fall into place. The house, the attic, the figure, it was all connected. The place wasn't just haunted by spirits or creatures, it was a prison. And the figure standing before him, it had been a part of this twisted cycle for longer than James could comprehend. As the figure reached out toward him, its hand trembling, James felt a surge of fear. But this time, it wasn't the terror of the entity, it was something else. It was the terror of the truth. And then, before he could react, everything went black. James James felt his body suspended in darkness, as if caught in a void between the world of the living and the unknown. His mind raced, thoughts fragmented, trying to piece together the final moments before he lost consciousness. He had been so close. The figure, the second figure, the one that had been almost human, had offered him a glimpse of hope, a lifeline in the form of a warning. But now it was gone. The attic, the house, the suffocating presence that had gripped him for so long, it all faded into the void. The next thing he knew, he was lying on the cold, wooden floor of the attic, his breath shallow and ragged. The air around him was thick, heavy, but eerily still. He opened his eyes slowly, the dim light filtering through the crack in the attic door, casting long shadows across the room. For a moment, he didn't move. He didn't even dare to breathe, afraid that if he did, the darkness would consume him again. The door was wide open now, the faint light from the hallway casting a sliver of brightness into the room. But that small beam only served to deepen the shadows in the corners where the figure still waited. It stood there, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark, watching him with an intensity that sent a chill racing down his spine. James sat up slowly, his body stiff and aching from the ordeal. His throat was raw, the remnants of the figure's cold grip still lingering on his skin. He rubbed his neck, the memory of its touch sending a shudder through him. It had felt like death itself had been breathing down his neck. He couldn't let that happen again. He glanced around the room, searching for any sign of the second figure, the one who had warned him, but it was gone, disappeared without a trace. All that remained was the oppressive, suffocating presence of the original entity, the one that had been waiting in the attic for so long. "Where are you?" James whispered hoarsely, his voice trembling. The words barely escaped his lips before the figure moved. It wasn't a sound that reached him first. It was a feeling. The coldness in the air, the subtle shift in the atmosphere that told him it was coming closer. He didn't need to see it. He could feel it. It was right there, in the dark, watching, waiting. James took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The fear that had gripped him so tightly was beginning to loosen, replaced by something else, something deeper. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was anger, and it was time to confront this thing, to end whatever nightmare had started in his house. With determination, he rose to his feet, his legs weak, but his resolve unbroken. He had to face it. There was no escaping now. The figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing brighter as it moved closer, filling the room with an oppressive, suffocating cold. It didn't speak at first. It didn't need to. The presence alone was enough to paralyze James with fear. But as it reached the center of the room, it stopped, its glowing eyes fixed on him, studying him almost as if it were trying to gauge his next move. "You're not meant to be here," the figure said, its voice a low rasp that seemed to echo in James's mind. "This house is ours. It has always been ours." James felt a surge of anger pulse through him. He had been a prisoner in this house for too long. He had been driven to the brink of madness by its presence. But now he had nothing left to lose. "I'm not leaving until I know the truth," he spat, his voice steady, though his body still trembled with fear. "Who are you? Why are you here? What do you want?" The figure's eyes flickered, and for a moment James saw something akin to amusement in the dark depths. It tilted its head, considering his words. Then it spoke again, its voice a hollow echo. "This house was built on a curse," it said, the words dripping with malice. "A curse that binds us to this place. We are the ones who remain. We are the ones who wait." James's mind raced. A curse? It was all starting to make sense, but the details still eluded him. "The second figure," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "The one who spoke to me. Who was it?" The figure's eyes narrowed, its form shifting ever so slightly as it seemed to weigh his question. "That was once a part of us," it said, its voice cold. "One of us, but not anymore. It is the last of the ones who tried to escape, the ones who failed." The revelation hit James like a punch to the gut. He wasn't dealing with just one malevolent force in this attic. No, this was part of something far older, far more dangerous. The entity wasn't alone. It had once been part of a group, a collective of some kind, trapped here by a curse that had bound them to the house. James stepped back, his mind reeling. "So this place is cursed?" he asked, the pieces slowly falling into place. "And what happens to anyone who comes here? What do you do to them?" The figure's gaze hardened. "They are trapped, like you, like all of us, until they too become one of us." James's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel it, the truth, the horrible, horrifying truth. This house, this cursed place, was a prison for souls. It had taken him. It had taken countless others, and it was waiting for more. And that second figure? It had been trying to escape, to warn him. The figure took a step closer, its eyes glowing brighter still. "You will become one of us in time. It is inevitable." James's body trembled with fear, but his mind was clearer than ever. He couldn't let this happen. He wouldn't let it. He had to escape. The door. He had to make it to the door. In a burst of adrenaline, he turned and sprinted toward the attic door, his feet pounding against the wooden floor. He heard the figure's footsteps behind him, heard its growl, its voice trailing off into a guttural laugh. But James didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He reached the door and flung it open, the light from the hallway flooding the room. For the first time since entering the attic, he saw the stairs clearly, the escape route laid out before him. Without looking back, he ran down the stairs, his heart hammering in his chest, his legs burning with the effort. But as he reached the bottom of the stairs, a voice echoed behind him. "You can't run from us. You can't run from us. You will never escape." James didn't slow down. He didn't stop. He just ran.